El día de hoy vamos a, en principio, reaccionar, creo que va a ser en dos partes. Es un debate entre el biólogo, el ateo más famoso del mundo, Richard Dawkins, y el cardenal George Pell. Muchos recordarán quién es George Pell. Hace unos años atrás estuvo involucrado en problemas judiciales por temas de abuso y demás, pero en el año 2018 la Corte Suprema, creo que es en el año 2018, corríjanme si no, la Corte Suprema de Australia lo absolvió porque parece de que nada, que estuvo toda mal hecha la causa y según parece fue toda una tramoya. No lo sé, eso fue lo que dijo la Corte Suprema. Entonces, como dijo la Corte Suprema eso, vamos a reaccionar a este debate porque entendemos de que bueno, ya no hay más nada turbio en medio. ¿Está bien? Si hasta el momento yo no había reaccionado al debate es porque, nada, me había quedado solamente con aquella noticia y me parece que no daba para reproducir un video donde había una persona que hizo eso, ¿no? Pero luego actualizándome un poco más, resulta ser de que, bueno, el cardenal quedó absuelto por la Corte Suprema de Justicia de Australia y al parecer se ha demostrado de que fue medio turbio ese juicio. ¿Está bien? Así que vamos a reaccionar a este debate entre el ateo más conocido del mundo con este cardenal y donde van a discutir el tema de la existencia de Dios. Aquí nos encontramos, vamos a ver, yo recuerdo que hace varios años atrás vi una cosa de 15 minutos de este debate. Y dije, qué buena onda, y después nunca más lo volví a retomar. Así que es como reaccionar por primera vez.
Good evening. And welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones, and answering your questions tonight, world-renowned evolutionary biologist and author of The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins. And wait a minute. Hold your applause just for a moment. And Australia's most senior Catholic churchman, the Archbishop of Sydney, Cardinal George Pell. Please welcome our special guest. Okay, Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Time and simulcast on News 24 and News Radio. Go to our website to send a question or join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag on your screen. And stay tuned for the chance to join Quanda Vote. You can register on your smartphone or smart device at the address on the screen. The address is quanda.vote.
Bueno, vamos. Metele un poco de velocidad a la cosa.
Our first question tonight comes from Naomi Rezeth.
At Easter, Australia's religious leaders invoke the name of God in order to preach peace, tolerance, political integrity, social and moral fortitude, all obviously positive and worthwhile values. My question is, in what way is the practice of these values dependent on an existing God? Is it possible for an atheist to be a peace-loving, socially responsible person?
Richard Dawkins, let's start with you.
Well, obviously the answer to that question is yes. I mean, that could hardly be otherwise. It is true that Christianity has adopted many of the best values of humanity, but they don't belong to Christianity or indeed to any other religion. I think it would be very sad if it were true that you really did need religion in order to be good.
Acá viene el problema que siempre William Lane Craig plantea, ¿no? No es que es necesario creer en Dios para ser bueno o formar parte de determinada religión para ser bueno. Si Dios no existe, no existen valores y deberes morales objetivos. Ese es el argumento, ¿no? Entonces, creo que la señora tuvo buenas intenciones al transmitir el planteo, pero me parece que dejó la puerta abierta para que Dawkins pueda salirse por la tangente. Yo no sé si ahí George Pell agarrará la posta y replanteará esto. Pero el tema es, desde la posición atea, ¿cuál es la razón por la que podrían llegar a defenderse valores y deberes morales objetivos? ¿En qué están anclados esos valores? ¿Se entiende? ¿Cuál es la naturaleza de dichos valores? ¿Simplemente es una perspectiva humana cultural? ¿Simplemente se debe al tiempo que estamos viviendo? ¿Estos valores pueden cambiar? ¿O en realidad son trascendentes? Ese es el planteo. Porque si Dios no existe, no parece encontrar una justificación para los valores y deberes morales objetivos.
If you think about it, what that would mean would be either that you get your morals and your values from the Bible or the Quran or some other holy book.
Ven, o sea, nosotros los cristianos nos decimos de que esos valores se obtienen de la Biblia. La misma Biblia te enseña de que los valores vienen en conjunto con la naturaleza humana, ¿no? El ser humano es capaz de poder identificar qué es bueno, qué es malo, qué es correcto e incorrecto, lo que se llama en el texto bíblico la ley natural, ¿no? Entonces la misma Biblia dice de que no es necesario conocer la Biblia para recibir estos valores, sino que el ser humano, por la naturaleza humana en sí, ya es capaz de poder identificar estos valores que existen, independientemente a la existencia del ser humano.
Religion is precisely often blamed for being the root of war and conflict. But what about all the good it has done for our society? God-centered religion has been the birthplace of schools, universities, hospitals, and countless developments in science as well. Richard, if you believe the human drive to seek the truth and to constantly improve ourselves is merely a mechanism for survival, then what's the point and why should I bother?
It's an astonishing idea to say, why should you bother just because we have a scientific understanding of why we're here. We do have a scientific
Del por qué estamos aquí.
understanding of why we're here, and we therefore have to make up our own meaning to life.
Guarda con ese el por qué estamos aquí, ¿eh? Una cosa, a ver, la biología no te puede decir la razón del por qué estás aquí. Te puede decir cuál ha sido la causa del por qué el ser humano existe. ¿Está bien? Entiendo. De que te puede decir cuáles fueron las causas que han producido estos efectos. Pero no cuál es la razón cuando se habla de propósito. ¿Está bien? ¿No ven que luego él apela a tenemos que encontrar nuestros propios propósitos en la vida? Bueno, ahí nos damos cuenta de que la biología y toda ciencia no es capaz de poder ir más allá de las causas y de una explicación materialista, ¿no? De lo que nos rodea. No puede abordar preguntas como el por qué, ¿se entiende? Entonces guarda con ese el por qué estamos aquí, ¿está bien? Porque puede ser confundido.
We have to find our own purposes in life, which are not derived directly from our scientific history. When you say that Christianity has been responsible for a lot of good, including science, by the way, which is somewhat ironic, I think that most of the great benefits in humanity, such as the abolition of slavery, such as the emancipation of women, which the Cardinal mentioned both of, these have been wrung out of our Christian history without much support from Christianity. I, as an atheist, my friends as atheists, lead thoroughly worthwhile lives, in our opinion, because we stand up, look the world in the face up to the fact that we are not going to last forever. We have to make the most of the short time that we have on this planet. We have to make this planet as good as we possibly can and try to leave it a better place than we found.
¿Por qué? ¿Por qué habrían que dejar a este lugar mejor de lo que lo encontraron? ¿Por qué? Está bien. Esto se remite a lo que él dice. Tenemos que buscarle un propósito personal a la vida, ¿no? Porque en definitiva Richard Dawkins no cree que la vida en sí misma tenga un propósito, sino, bueno, cada uno según el lugar que le ha tocado, según la suerte que le ha tocado, tiene que encontrar su propio propósito, ¿no? Bueno, pero y además, ¿qué querés decir con un lugar mejor desde la perspectiva atea? ¿Qué querés decir? ¿Con mayores y mejores valores? Pero si los valores son subjetivos, ¿cómo identificás lo que es mejor y lo que es peor? Para una cultura algo que para otra es mejor, para ella puede ser peor. Entonces, ¿qué querés decir con un lugar mejor? Tecnológicamente hablando, ¿y para qué sirve la tecnología sin valores? ¿Se entiende? O sea, de repente los avances que pudieron hacerse en ciertas áreas de la ciencia terminaron produciendo una bomba nuclear que ha devastado casi todo un país. Entonces, ¿qué querés decir con un lugar mejor? Cuando hablas de mejor, estás hablando de una virtud propia del ser humano, pero si Dios no existen valores y deberes morales objetivos. Por ende, resulta ser una utopía pensar en un lugar mejor, ¿no? Porque además para un ateo un lugar mejor puede ser algo y para otro ateo puede ser otra cosa completamente distinta.
Now, to some degree, you've already answered this, but there is a follow-up question. I'm going to go to that now. It's from Rebecca Ray.
Okay, my question for you today is, without religion, where is the basis of our values? And in time, will we perhaps revert back to Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest?
Para mí le están pifiando con las preguntas. O sea, están bien encaminadas con el tema de los valores, pero es como que no están siendo ahí certeros.
Richard Dawkins, you can answer that and I'll bring in Cardinal Pell.
I very much hope that we don't revert to the idea of survival of the fittest in planning our politics and our values and our way of life. I've often said that I'm a passionate Darwinian when it comes to explaining why we exist. It's undoubtedly the reason why we're here and why all living things are here.
No. Acá fíjense en algo. Si nosotros, entendiendo de que la traducción está bien, dice, es sin duda la razón de por qué estamos aquí. No es la razón, guarda con eso, ¿está bien? ¿Y por qué todos los seres vivos están aquí? ¿Cuál es la razón? Cuando hablamos de la razón estamos hablando de un propósito, de un ser inteligente que está detrás de la creación, ¿está bien? Entonces la ciencia, la biología particularmente no te puede decir eso. No puede responder cuál es la razón del por qué estamos aquí. Sí puede responder cuál ha sido la causa nuestra, ¿está bien? Pero no la razón.
The reason why we're here and why all living things are here. But to live our lives in a Darwinian way, to make a society a Darwinian society, that would be a very unpleasant sort of society in which to live. It would be a sort of Thatcherite society. And we want to, I mean, in a way, I feel that one of the reasons for learning about Darwinian evolution is as an object lesson in how not to set up our values and our social lives.
George Pell.
Well, it's interesting because I think in the space of about 2 minutes, Richard has said two different things. One of which is that science can't tell us why we're here, and then in the next minute, trying to say that it does.
No, I said it can tell us why we're here.
It can't.
Well, I simply contradict you in that case.
Well, what is the reason that science gives why we're here?
Ven, él agarró al vuelo esto mismo que yo estoy recalcando.
Science tells us how things happen.
Las causas.
Science tells us nothing about why there was the Big Bang, why there is a transition from inanimate matter to living matter. Science is silent on, we could solve most of the questions in science and it would leave all the problems of life almost completely untouched. Why be good?
Why be good is a separate question which I also...
El por qué ser bueno es una cuestión aparte. Bueno, esa pregunta no la puede responder la ciencia. ¿Por qué ser bueno? Recuerden que hice ese comentario al pasar. ¿Qué quiere decir con un mejor mundo y cosas por el estilo? ¿Cuál es la razón por la que tienen estas ideas? ¿Está bien? Bueno, es un gusto personal, puede decir el ateo. Es una postura personal que he tomado. Bueno, está bien, pero se limita a eso. La ciencia no te puede decir más nada.
So came to why we exist. You're playing with the word why there. Science is working on the problem of the antecedent factors that lead to our existence. Now, why in any further sense than that, why in the sense of purpose, is in my opinion not a meaningful question. You cannot ask a question like, why do mountains exist?
Ven que el problema está con el por qué. ¿Qué queremos decir con por qué? Y Richard Dawkins metió el por qué así, y si pasaba, pasaba, ¿no? Pero el cardenal lo agarró muy bien.
As though mountains had some kind of purpose. What you can say is what are the causal factors that lead to the existence of mountains? And the same with life and the same with the universe. Now, science over the centuries has gradually pieced together answers to those questions. Why in that sense? It's true that there are still some gaps, but surely, Cardinal, you're not going to fall for the God of the gaps trap of saying that religion is going to fill in those gaps which science has so far not yet answered.
No, I'm not going to be diverted at all. I'm happy to come back to that.
Okay.
We will be coming back to it because I know there are questions that relate to some of the bigger issues you're talking about, but you can respond and then we'll move on to our next one.
I hope I'll be allowed to.
You certainly
Thanks. It's part of being human to ask why we exist. Questioning distinguishes us from the animals. It's to ask why we're here. So I repeat, and this is a commonplace in science. Science has nothing to say about that. As whatever it might say about mountains, it can't say what is the purpose of human life. And it's not Maggie Thatcher who was the epitome or the personification of social Darwinism. It's Hitler and Stalin.
¡Uy, qué piña le acaba de meter! Tiene mucha razón, tiene mucha razón. ¿Qué piña le acaba de meter? Está bueno porque el cardenal debate desde la filosofía. Y Richard Dawkins, o sea, no sale de la biología. Y cada vez que Richard Dawkins quiere hacer planteos filosóficos, le ha ido muy mal. Entonces, perdón, pero si van a discutir el tema de Dios, aquel que lo aborde desde la filosofía es el que va a salir victorioso. No podés comparar no podés comparar a dos personas que debatan este tema desde el plano de la ciencia con el plano de la filosofía. La ciencia va a estar limitada y cuando alguien quiera trascender esos límites, romper las barreras de la ciencia para dar respuestas existenciales desde la biología, me parece que ahí vas a terminar diciendo burradas, ¿está bien? La clave acá está desde la filosofía.
Because it's the struggle for survival. The strong take what they can and the weak give what they must, and there's nothing to restrain them. And we've seen that in the two great atheist movements of the last century.
No, that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous.
Muy bueno estuvo ese comentario.
Nice unbiased audience you've assembled here, by the way.
Right, let's clearly distinguish two things here. First, atheism had nothing to do with Hitler or Stalin. Stalin was an atheist, Hitler was not. It doesn't matter what they were with
Gracias ahí a la gente que me sigue. Muchas gracias.
respect to atheism. They did their horrible things for entirely different reasons. Now, you are right when you say that aspects of what Hitler tried to do could be regarded as arising out of Darwinian natural selection. That's exactly why I said that I despise Darwinian natural selection as a motto for how we should live. I tried to say we should not live by Darwinian principles, but Darwinian principles explain how we got here and why we exist in the scientific sense. Now, Cardinal, you said it's part of human nature to want to ask the question why, in the sense of purpose. It may very well be part of human nature, but that doesn't make it a valid question. There are all sorts of questions which you can ask. What's funny about that? What is funny about that?
OK, we'd like the audience not to yell out. If we can do that, that'd be great. We're going to move on.
I didn't finish, I'm sorry.
OK, well, finish your point.
OK.
Because there are lots of questions pertaining to this. We will
The question why is not necessarily a question that deserves to be answered. There are all sorts of questions that people can ask, like, what is the colour of jealousy? That's a silly question.
Exactly.
Why is a silly question? Why is a silly question? You can ask, what are the factors that led to something coming into existence? That's a sensible question. But what is the purpose of the universe is a silly question. It has no meaning.
Could I just interpose?
Bueno, pero para él no tiene sentido la pregunta porque presupone de antemano que Dios no existe. Presupone que no hay un sentido trascendente. O sea, para él no tiene sentido porque él presupone muchas ideas injustificadamente.
Very briefly. I think it's a very poignant and real question to ask, why is there suffering?
We will be asking that question, believe it or not. This is Q&A. It's live and interactive. Tonight we're experimenting with QuandaVote, a new way for Q&A viewers to share their opinions on the issues we discuss. You can go to the quandavote.tv website on your smartphone, tablet or computer to vote in our very first religious belief, make the world a better place. Does religious belief make the world a better place? We'll report back later.
As saying you can't prove that God doesn't exist, and you say you're agnostic rather than atheistic. Why do you appear as the champion of atheism around the world? Why do you accept offers to appear as the champion of atheism? And why are you so evangelical in the prosecution of your cause? Isn't that a touch hypocritical and unscientific?
Yes, Richard Dawkins, I'm a bit confused about this because you just referred to yourself moments ago as being an atheist. With the Archbishop of Canterbury, you referred to yourself as an agnostic.
In the God delusion, I made a 7-point scale. 1 is I'm totally confident there is a God. 7 is I'm totally confident there is not a God. 6 is, to all intents and purposes, I'm an atheist. I live my life as though there is no God. But any scientist of any sense will not say that they positively can disprove the existence of anything. I cannot disprove the existence of the Easter Bunny. And so I'm agnostic about the Easter Bunny. It's in the same respect that I'm agnostic about God. So,
What proof, by
Soy agnóstico en cuanto a el conejo de Pascua. Fantástico.
the way, would change your mind?
that's a very difficult and interesting question because, I mean, I used to think that if somehow, you know, great big, giant, 900-foot-high Jesus with a voice like Paul Robeson suddenly strode in and said, I exist, here I am. But even that, I actually sometimes wonder whether that would...
I think you're hallucinating.
Exactly. I agree.
Viene bien el cardenal, tengo que ser sincero, la viene ganando.
Well, can I just put a question to you? Could you ever provide Richard Dawkins with the sort of proof he requires for belief, scientific proof of the existence of God?
No, because I think he only accepts proof that is rooted in sense experience. In other words, he excludes the world of metaphysics, say the principle of contradiction, and he excludes the possibility of arguments that don't go against reason, but go beyond it. But could I make one little suggestion as to why Richard calls himself an atheist? Because in one of his blogs in 2002, he was discussing whether he's an agnostic or a non-theist. He said he prefers to use the term atheist because it's more explosive, it's more dynamic. You can shake people up. Whereas if you're just going around saying that you're an agnostic or a non-theist, it's not... these are his own words.
Well, let's let Richard Dawkins...
I don't remember saying that. It wouldn't totally surprise me.
Le pegó ahí duro, ese fue un golpe bajo. Me gusta la actitud del cardenal.
It's
in 2002.
It's an ongoing issue. What's the best way? There is a problem with
Salir de ahí maravilla, ¿no? El tipo no lo quiere escuchar, ya quiere salir de ahí.
the word atheist, especially in America. I don't know whether it's true in Australia. There's a lovely woman, I'm blocking on her name because I'm jet-lagged. She's Irish-American woman. Anybody help me?
There are quite a few Irish-American women. Sorry about that.
Sorry? No. Anyway, I do apologise personally to her for forgetting her name. She's an actress and she's got she did a film on how she escaped from the Roman Catholic Church, and it's a very moving film. And at the end, her mother discovered that she was an atheist, and her mother phoned her up and said, well, I don't mind you not believing in God, but an atheist? Her name's Julia Sweeney, so it's suddenly come back to me. I strongly recommend that. Now, the point is that the word atheist, unlike just simply not believing in God, has bad connotations. And so, to some extent, people have wished to depart from that and change the name to non-theist or secularist or non-believer. And I waver back and forth as to what's the best name to use. I sometimes call myself an atheist, sometimes a non-theist, and sometimes just a non-believer.
George Pell, can I just come back to you on this question of the existence of God? Why would God randomly decide to provide proof of his existence to a small group of Jews 2,000 years ago and not subsequently provide any proof after that?
Well,
Buena
I don't think
pregunta.
there's ever been any scientific proof. I don't believe God does anything randomly, although he might set up a system which works apparently through, through chance, through random. But if you want to get if you want something done, you've got to ask somebody. It's no good, say, my asking everyone in the congregation, will you do something? Normally you go to a busy person because you know they'll do it. And so for some extraordinary reason, God chose the Jews. They weren't intellectually the equal of either the Egyptians or the
Intellectually?
intellectually,
How
morally.
how can you know intellectually?
Because you see the fruits of their civilization. Egypt was the great power for thousands of years before Christianity. Persia was a great power. Chaldea.
Es una buena pregunta esa.
The poor, the little Jewish people, they were originally shepherds. They were stuck, they're still stuck
But that's,
between
not,
these
that's,
great
that's not a
powers.
reflection of your intellectual capacity, is it, whether or not you're a shepherd?
Well,
Es una buena pregunta. Ahí lo acorralaron a George Pell. Pero no porque no tenga respuesta a la pregunta, me parece. Simplemente creo que esa pregunta es una de esas preguntas que hay veces que en vivo te agarran desorientado y no sabes cómo pilotearla. A mí me ha pasado un montón de veces. Es una buena pregunta. El por qué Dios... y cuando hablamos del por qué de Dios, ¿no? ¿Cuál es la razón por la que Dios actuó de esta manera? El intelecto humano no es capaz de poder entender la mente infinita de Dios. Por ende, lo único que podemos llegar a decir es acerca de las intenciones de Dios, es aquello que Dios ha revelado al ser humano, porque el hombre no es capaz de poder indagar en la mente de Dios, ¿se entiende? Entonces, acá solamente podemos apelar a respuestas bíblicas, entendiendo de que la Biblia es un conjunto de libros inspirados, que eso sería motivo para otro debate, cuál es la razón por la que creemos que eso es cierto, y ahí lo podríamos dar a las razones del por qué creemos que la Biblia es un conjunto de libros inspirados. Ahora, presuponiendo que así es desde el punto de vista cristiano, porque George Pell tiene que responder como cristiano, una buena respuesta sería... entendiendo de que Dios le hizo un juramento a Abraham. ¿Está bien? Abraham se comportó de forma prudente delante de él, caminó correctamente delante de él, etc. Y Dios le dio una promesa a Abraham. Y eso luego se hizo realidad a través de su descendencia. Pero más allá de la pregunta bíblica con respecto a cuáles fueron las razones del por qué Dios actuó como actuó, no podés ir. Porque vuelvo a repetir, ¿qué ser humano puede indagar en la mente de Dios? Absolutamente nadie.
No, it's not, but it's a recognition, it is a reflection of your intellectual development. But like many people are very, very clever and not highly intellectual. But my point is...
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Are you including Jesus in that? Or?
Salí de ahí, maravilla. Este es el momento en donde alguien le tiene que decir a George Pell, salí de ahí, maravilla.
Obviously he was Jewish and was of that community.
Exactly.
So intellectually not up to it?
Lo agarraron. No sé cómo va a responder, pero este momento de silencio, porque además en un debate en vivo, esos momentos de silencio que toda persona, seas ateo, agnóstico, cristiano y demás, necesitas, porque necesitas, a ver, me hicieron una pregunta, voy a pensar bien cuál va a ser mi respuesta. Pero hay veces que la dinámica de esto en vivo no se entiende de esa manera, y más cuando te agarran por sorpresa. Entonces fue un buen golpe esa pregunta, vamos a ver cómo sale de este problema. Pero ya con la pregunta inicial del por qué los judíos, me parece que George Pell dio una respuesta un poco floja.
Well, that's a nice try, Tony. The people, in terms of sophistication, the Psalms are remarkable. In terms of their buildings and that sort of thing, they don't compare with the great powers. But Jesus came not as a philosopher to the elite. He came to the poor and the battlers. And for some reason, he chose a very difficult, but actually they are now an intellectually elite, because over the centuries they've been pushed out of every other form of work. Jesus, I think, is the greatest, son of God, but leaving that aside, the greatest man that ever lived. So I've got a great admiration for the Jews, but we don't need to exaggerate their contribution in their early days.
All right.
Fue pésima la respuesta de George Pell. Pésima. Fue muy mala. Fue muy mala, pero porque arrancó mal con el tema de cuál es la razón por la que Dios escogió al pueblo judío. Arrancó mal desde ahí, entonces lo agarró con el tema de Jesús y ahí me parece que se llevó una buena piña.
You're watching Q&A. Remember, you can send your web or video questions to our website. The address is on the screen to find out how to do that. Our next question is a video. It comes from Andrew Watson in Blackburn, Victoria.
Question for Richard Dawkins. The Big Bangers believe that once there was nothing, then suddenly, poof, the universe was created from a Big Bang. If I have nothing in the palm of my hand, close my fingers, speak the word bang, then open my fingers again, still I find there is nothing there. I ask you to explain to us in layman's terms how it is that something as enormous as the universes came from nothing.
Richard Dawkins.
Es cierto, está cumpliendo muy bien el rol de moderador, el moderador. Obviamente debe ser partidario del ateísmo o del cristianismo, ¿no? Seguramente, pero lo está siendo bien imparcial. Eso está bueno.
Well, obviously you're not a physicist, nor... and nor am I, and I am delighted to say that during my time in Australia I shall be having a number of conversations, public conversations with my colleague Lawrence Krauss, including one in the Sydney Opera House later, I think it's next week. And he's written a book on exactly that topic of how you can get something from nothing, and I shall be questioning him.
¿Cómo puede conseguir algo de la nada? Bueno, acá es en donde Richard Dawkins, creo que tal y como se formuló la pregunta, él podría haber dado una buena respuesta al respecto, mostrando cierta ignorancia en la pregunta, ¿no? Pero ya cuando hace este tipo de afirmación, acá vos te das cuenta de, vos decís, ¿cómo se puede conseguir algo de la nada? De la nada nada sale, o sea... pero bueno, nada, también tiene que ver con respecto al significado que le dan a la palabra nada, que la resignifican, ¿está bien?
About that. Of course it's counterintuitive that you can get something from nothing. Of course common sense doesn't allow you to get something from nothing. That's why it's interesting. It's got to be interesting in order to give rise to the universe at all. Something pretty mysterious had to give rise to the origin of the universe. Now, if you want to replace a physical explanation by an intelligent God, that's an even worse explanation. It's an even more difficult explanation. What scientists are trying to do is to explain how you can get not just something, but the immense complexity of the world, of the universe, and of life. And science is making a pretty good fist of doing that. Life is now completely solved, barring the details. That was Darwin's contribution and Darwin's successors. Physicists are still working on the origin of the cosmos. Among them is Lawrence Krauss, whom I shall be talking to next.
Lawrence Krauss resignifica la palabra nada, y él quiere decir nada vacío cuántico, y eso no es nada.
Next week. Now, it is very mysterious how the universe came in.
Además, Lawrence Krauss en una conferencia salió a decir que 2 más 2 es igual a 5. No recuerdo dónde está eso, pero salió a decir eso.
To being. It's a deeply mysterious and interesting question.
And can I just interrupt? It's an old question, a very old question. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century was asking this same question. He said there must have been a time when no physical things existed, but something can't come from nothing. That was his view. It's just been repeated by us.
Something can come from nothing, and that's what physicists are now telling us.
Algo puede venir de la nada. Ahí ya te das cuenta que está sesgado hasta la mandíbula.
You asked me to give you a layman's interpretation. It would be a very, very layman's interpretation. When you have matter and antimatter and you put them together, they cancel each other out and give rise to nothing. What Lawrence Krauss is now suggesting is that if you start with nothing, the process can go into reverse and produce matter and antimatter. The theory is still being worked out. It's a very...
La teoría todavía se está elaborando, o sea... acá está reconociendo que es una idea que se ha tirado nada más, pero, o sea, ¿cómo vas a responder? Acá te das cuenta la necesidad de dar una respuesta, ¿no? Porque ¿cómo vas a responder con algo que 2 minutos después vas a decir que es una teoría que todavía se está elaborando? Sería mucho más honesto decir, mirá, la verdad es que hay varias hipótesis que se están discutiendo, pero hasta el momento es una cuestión que nos mantiene en vilo porque desde nuestra cosmovisión no podemos dar una respuesta coherente. Nada más, me parece que es lo más honesto. Ahora, arrancó diciendo que de la nada algo puede surgir, y 2 doritos más adelante termina diciendo la teoría todavía se está elaborando. O sea, ¿para qué decís lo que decís si todavía no hay certeza?
Very difficult theory, mathematical theory. I'm not qualified to answer the question, but what I am sure about is that it most certainly is not solved by postulating an intelligence, a creative intelligence.
No estoy todavía... Fíjense lo que acaba de decir.
And antimatter, and you put them together and produce matter and antimatter.
Fíjense lo que acaba de
decir. The theory
decir.
is still being worked out. It's a very difficult theory, mathematical theory. I'm not qualified to
No estoy capacitado para responder a la pregunta.
answer the question, but what I am sure about
Pero
is
de
that
lo
it
que
most
estoy
certainly
seguro es que
not
seguramente
solved
no se
by
resuelve
postulating
postulando una
an
inteligencia,
intelligence, a creative
una inteligencia
intelligence.
creativa. Pero ¿estás o no estás capacitado para responder esa pregunta? No está, o sea, él lo que asume es no está capacitado para responderla positivamente, pero sí está capacitado para negar la existencia de un creador. Bastante contradictorio en esos 7 segundos que duró su respuesta.
Who raises even bigger questions of his own existence. That certainly is not going to be the answer, whatever else is.
George Pell.
Thank you. The trouble, well, there are many troubles with Richard's teachings, but a fundamental one is that he dumbs down God and he soups up nothing. He continually talks as though God is some sort of upmarket figure within space and time. Now, from 450, 500 BC, where with the Greek philosophers, God is outside space and time. God is necessary, self-sufficient, uncaused, unconditioned. That's the hypothesis you've got to wrestle with. The second thing is that Krauss says nothing about the Big Bang coming out of nothing. Admittedly, he comes clean on about 6 pages from the end of his book, and I don't know whether Richard has read it that far because he gave it a foreword. What he says is what Richard is describing as nothing is a sort of a mixture of particles and perhaps a vacuum with electromagnetic forces working on it. That's what Krauss is talking about under the heading of nothing. And there's a very good review of this in the New York Times. Not a pro-religious paper at all, where Krauss is absolutely denied and demolished, although especially by his supporters claiming that he says things come out of nothing. He doesn't say that.
It's a matter,
you can quickly respond to that before the
you
next
can
one.
dispute exactly what's meant by nothing, but whatever it is, it's very, very simple. And why is that funny?
Porque está diciendo una burrada, eso es lo gracioso, que está con el problema de la nada.
Well, I think it's a bit funny to be trying to define nothing.
Claro, eso es lo gracioso, que está tratando de redefinir la palabra nada.
Well, can I put that to you as a question? Is it equally feasible, since you can't prove the existence of God, that the nothing you're talking about is in fact some creative force?
If you talk about a God who is a creative intelligence, then that is something very complicated and very improbable, and something that requires explaining in its own right. The nothing that Lawrence Krauss is talking about, whether or not it's what a naive person would conceive as nothing or what a sophisticated physicist would consider to be nothing, it is going to be something much, much simpler than a creative intelligence. We are struggling, we're all struggling, scientists are struggling, to explain how we get the fantastic order and complexity of the universe out of very simple and therefore easy to understand, easy to explain beginnings. Lawrence Krauss calls the substrate of his explanation nothing. It's possible to dispute whether nothing is quite the right word, but whatever it is very, very simple, and therefore is a worthy premise for an explanation, whereas a God, a creative intelligence, is not a worthy substrate for an explanation because it is already something very complicated. And it's no good invoking Thomas Aquinas and saying that God is defined as outside time and space. That's just a cop-out. That's just an evasion of the responsibility to explain. That's just setting out what you want to prove before you've even started.
Okay, let's move on to a question.
No, pobre la pregunta. No respondió nada.
On evolution for Cardinal Peltz from Joe Blades.
As a young Catholic scientist, I'd like to ask the Cardinal to clarify the Roman Catholic Church's position on evolution and comment on whether the dichotomy between science and religion is in fact real.
Well, science and religion are two different activities, and in the Catholic Church, you can believe to some extent what you like about evolution. I think Darwin made a great contribution. I remember talking with Julius Kornberg, a very distinguished biologist, and he's worked with ants for years. And he said, you know, he's managed to change them by changing the conditions. But there are a number of things that evolution doesn't explain. Darwin realised that. Darwin was a theist because he said he couldn't believe that the immense cosmos and all the beautiful things in the world came about either by chance or out of necessity. He said, I have to be ranked as a theist. Now,
that's just not true.
Excuse me,
it's plain not true.
It's on page 92 of his autobiography.
¡Oh! Le acaba de meter una piña en la boca del estómago. Dato mata relato.
Sorry, can I just bring you, in a sense, to the point of the question?
Pará. Fíjate esto. Sale diciendo, ¿viste cuando eso no es cierto? Y automáticamente George Pell le dice, eso lo dice en la página 92 de su autobiografía. Y quedó en silencio Richard Dawkins. Se terminó, ahí ya está.
Accept that humans evolved from apes.
Yeah, probably. From Neanderthals, yes. Whether...
From Neanderthals?
Probably.
Why from Neanderthals?
Well, who else would you suggest?
Neanderthals were our cousins. We're not descended from them. And we're both descended from...
Esos aplausos son para simplemente levantarle la autoestima a Dawkins, ¿no?
Are these extant cousins? Where will I find a Neanderthal today if they're my cousins?
They're not extant, they're extinct.
Exactly, that's my point.
Your point is that because they're extant, they can't be our cousins.
I really am not much fussed.
That's very clear.
Something in the evolutionary story seems to have come before humans. A lot of people say it's Neanderthals.
Can we say this? Humans, you accept that humans evolved from non-humans. So let me put this to you as a question. At what point in this evolutionary scale was a soul imparted to the humans from God?
Look, a soul isn't... it's not like putting a spot of gin in a tonic. The soul is the principle of life. So whenever there was a principle of life that could question, that could be open to awe, that was able to communicate, then we had the first human. Now, we believe that the first humans developed in South Africa. I'm not quite sure how long ago, and that all humans have developed from that. We know most about that. There aren't remains. We know most about that because of the drawings they left on walls and caves and that sort of thing. No such thing from Neanderthals. So we can't say exactly when there was a first human, but we have to say if there are humans, there must have been a first one. There might have been equal first, but if there is a progression, there's got to be first.
So, are you talking about...
A ver, acá me parece a mí, no sé cómo va a salir parado de esta, pero me parece que se acaba de meter en un tema que puede salir perjudicado. No porque el cristianismo no sea capaz de responder este tipo de planteos, sino porque se mostró muy dubitativo. Vamos a ver cómo sigue.
Garden of Eden scenario with an actual Adam and Eve.
Well, what Adam and Eve terms, what do they mean? Life and earth. It's like every man. That's a beautiful, sophisticated, mythological account. It's not science, but it's there to tell us two or three things. First of all, that God created the world and the universe. Secondly, that the key to the whole of the universe, the really significant thing, are humans. And thirdly, it's a very sophisticated mythology to try to explain the evil and the suffering of the world.
But it isn't a literal truth. You shouldn't see it in any way as being an historical or literal truth.
It's certainly not a scientific truth, and it's a religious story told for religious purposes.
And just quickly, because the Old Testament in particular is full of...
¿No cree que Adán y Eva sean seres humanos reales, que hayan sido individuos históricos?
These kind of stories. I mean, is there a point where you distinguish between metaphor and reality? For example, Moses receiving the Ten Commandments inscribed directly by God on a mountain.
I'm not sure that the Old Testament says that God inscribed the Ten Commandments, but leaving that aside, it's difficult to know how exactly that worked, but Moses was a great man. There was a great encounter with the divine. Actually, with Moses, we get the key that enables us to come together with the Greeks with reason, because Moses said, "Who will I tell the Egyptians?" And he said, "Tell that my name is I am who I am."
Okay, I'm going to bring Richard Dawkins back in here because we've moved from...
Me parece que no salió bien parado de esa pregunta, George Pell. Y claramente él cree de que Adán y Eva son seres mitológicos.
Solution, obviously, to the biblical versions of it. Your response?
Well, I'm curious to know if Adam and Eve never existed, where did original sin come from? But
Buena pregunta, se tendría que haber quedado con eso a ver qué responde.
I also would like to clarify the point about whether there ever was a first human. That's a rather difficult and puzzling question, because we know that the previous species from which we're descended is probably Homo erectus, and before that some sort of Australopithecine. But there never was a last Homo erectus who gave birth to the first Homo sapiens. Every creature ever born belonged to the same species as its parents. The process of evolution is so gradual that you can never say, aha, now suddenly we have the first human. It was always a case of just a slightly different from the previous generation. That's a scientific point, which I think is quite interesting. I'm not sure if it has a theological significance, except that I think successive popes have tried to suggest that the soul did indeed get added, rather like gin to tonic, at some particular point during evolution. At some point in evolution, there was no soul, and then later there was one. So it is quite an interesting question to ask. Now we have rather a good fossil record from Africa of the descent of humans, from Australopithecines to various species of Homo, perhaps Homo habilis, perhaps Homo erectus, then archaic Homo sapiens, and then modern Homo sapiens. At what point did the soul get injected? And what does the idea of original sin mean if Adam and Eve never existed?
I'll just quickly let you respond to that.
Well, I mean, God wasn't running around giving injections. And if there is no first person, where did
the soul come from then?
The soul is a principle of life. There are animal souls. All living things have some principle of life. An animal has a principle of life. A human has a soul, a principle of life, which is immensely more sophisticated. We even have a voice box, which is one of the great miracles, so that we can communicate our thoughts to one another rather than just grunting.
I'm pleased we're not grunting tonight. Let's move along. You can, by the way, don't forget you can still vote at quandavote.tv, I should say, on the question, does religious belief make the world a better place? Over 15,000 viewers.
Qué lástima. Me parece de que ahí nos vamos a quedar. Minuto 36. En el minuto 36 nos quedamos. Qué lástima. Me parece que tendrían que haber explotado esa pregunta. ¿Qué pasa con el pecado original? Hubiera sido buena. Capaz que después más adelante continúan con ese punto. Hubiera sido buena. A ver, hasta acá me parece que ha sido un debate que claramente George Pell es superior, ha cometido errores, sí, son propios de un debate tan informal y tan dinámico como esos, ¿no? Que de repente te agarran con una pregunta que te deja un poco descolocado, pero bueno, me parece que hasta el momento George Pell sale victorioso. No sé qué es lo que opinan ustedes al respecto. Sí, para mí en el tema de los judíos se quedó corto, y en el tema ahora al final del alma, Adán y Eva y demás, me parece que también se queda corto. Pero nada, creo que no se le hizo hincapié. Ahí tanto Dawkins como el moderador hasta el momento fueron flojos en eso. Tenían que haber sido más punzantes con el tema de la evolución, me parece a mí.